Hello everyone, my name is Cosmic and welcome to the video in which I will rank the quality of Elden Ring's Remembrance bosses. To be clear, this video will only be including bosses that drop remembrances upon their deaths. This video is also entirely subjective and you'll probably disagree with me at some points, and that's awesome. Be sure to share your opinion in the comments below. At number 15, we have Radagon of the Golden Order and Elden Beast. As much as it sucks to begin the video with the final boss of the game, arguably the most important boss to nail, I have to do it. The first phase involves fighting Radagon of the Golden Order, and I do think this fight is better than the one that follows it, but still one of the more weaker ones. For the most part, I find Radagon's attacks to be a bizarre mixture of generic, unimpressive, and pretty irritating, with almost all of them involving simple melee swings or area of effect slams. He mixes it up in phase 2 a little bit by teleporting, but even then, Radagon is so obsessed with AoEs that he has to add one to every single one of these teleports as well. The only good thing about these attacks is that if you are able to dodge or jump through them, then it opens up a window for a lot of damage, but I just don't find the gameplay loop with Radagon too fun, and it gets interrupted too often by slow, delayed AoEs. And at the end of all that, you celebrate by fighting the Elden Beast, which is even worse and feels more unpleasant to fight. It has some pretty boring melee attacks that open it up for some damage, but for the most part, all it wants to do is swim away from you and put on its firework display of borderline undodgeable projectiles. Look at this footage and tell me this looks fun. Once you close the distance to deal damage, it probably just wants to do the same thing again, i.e. swim away from you. If Radagon did not feel like it interrupted the flow of battle, then Elden Beast definitely does. It has one attack where you have to run and jump over some rings. Why? Visually, it's beautiful, just like the whole fight, but the entire thing is just like, why? This fight is so bad, I'm actually surprised it made it into the final release of the game, and as the finale of the game as well. It is especially disappointing coming right after amazing fights like Malekith and Hoarah. Attacks like the ones the Elden Beast uses are just not very fun to deal with. I feel like no matter what build you're using, especially as a melee character. Number 14 is Astul, Natural Born of the Void. There's one thing nobody can deny about Astul: it looks absolutely incredible. But that's pretty much where my compliments end for this boss. Unfortunately, a cool appearance doesn't really make up for how unpleasant he feels to fight. It's quite lanky, meaning as a melee character, he can be difficult to hit at the best of times. The only places particularly easy to hit are its arms, which it frequently uses to attack you with huge AoE attacks. These usually involve it conjuring a purple ball, and then plunging it into the ground, following it up with 3 or 4 zaps. These zaps are probably my biggest issue with this fight, since the area they affect is huge and are almost impossible to escape from if you're underneath it, which again is the only position where you can deal damage reliably as a melee character. The zaps are also timed in such a way that even if you perfectly roll the first 2, the final one will always hit you, which I personally find quite infuriating whenever I fight the boss. To me, getting hit by this after successfully dodging the first 2 feels like I'm being punished despite timing my rolls for the incoming attack. Aside from this, Astul unleashes a massive time-bending AoE attack around him that will cause massive damage if you get hit by it. When he isn't unleashing these attacks, Astul will teleport away from you and reappear somewhere else in the arena, forcing you to run across the planet again to reach it and repeat this process. You don't even have access to torrent in this arena, so you have to run there on foot. Fortunately, its long-range attacks are much easier to deal with, but it doesn't excuse the fact that you will eventually have to deal with its frustrating ones when you reach it again. I mentioned earlier that my one compliment about this boss was its incredible appearance, and I do stand by that statement still. However, even that is somewhat diminished by FromSoft reusing him in a random dungeon later in the game. The boss looks good, but I do not enjoy fighting either the Natural Born of the Void or the Stars of Darkness encounters, which is a real shame because I do think this boss looks absolutely amazing. FromSoft do enjoy creating boss set pieces designed specifically for a certain weapon. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, our number 13 boss, is just that in the context of Elden Ring. And this time, FromSoft have given us what I think is the most fun gimmick weapon so far, the Serpent Hunter, which fires a massive gust of wind in front of itself after every attack, allowing you to fight from range. Unfortunately, however, the enjoyment of this weapon is not enough for me to say that this is a particularly fun boss fight. Rykard appears to us first as the God-devouring serpent, an encounter in which the Serpent Hunter is very much optional. It's a fairly standard fight, and the moveset is very limited, its most opportune attack for punishment being its quick double or triple bites, or this multi-bite combo that feels like it never ends. Below the serpent, at all times, is a pool of lava, which is not really an annoyance because of the damage it deals, because it really doesn't do much at all, but because of how easily it staggers you and interrupts your attacks. It's not much of a problem facing the God-devouring serpent, but it becomes much more egregious in Phase 2 when he becomes Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. The pool of lava underneath him becomes much larger. Rykard will move forward, even just a slight bit, to perform a sword swing. You can dodge this backwards perfectly, go to retaliate with the Serpent Hunter, but get staggered suddenly by a tiny amount of damage from the gigantic lava pool underneath him. I do have a bit of a problem with this, and it frustrates me immensely because, just like Astel, I feel like I'm being punished despite dodging the sword swing perfectly. Rykard will lift his sword into the air and transform the arena into a bloody red hellscape. When this happens, you better be prepared for an absolute spam fest. This is where I die the most throughout both phases of this fight, and for every single death, I couldn't tell you exactly what dealt the killing blow. Skulls, lava plumes appearing arbitrarily from the ground, blood bubbles from some sword attacks, oh, and don't forget the actual sword swings, and the even faster snake bites. When the arena turns red, it truly just feels like so much is thrown at you, it's unrealistic to deal with it. It is simply unreasonable to expect anybody, even the most seasoned veterans who are more adapted to paying attention to multiple things at once during boss fights, to pay attention to 1,000 skulls, a giant lava pool, random lava plumes, and also expect them to retroactively react to what Rykard is doing, whether it would be sword swings or snake bites. It's possible I'm missing something with this boss, but it truly just feels like a relentless onslaught of spam when he enters this phase. With all that negativity out of the way, I do actually enjoy this fight at most other times. I don't like the poison spew during the God-devouring serpent, or the big lava pool underneath him, but I do enjoy using the Serpent Hunter, and when I'm not being spammed, I find it immensely more enjoyable than Astel and Elden Beast. This one might shock some of you. At number 12 is Mog, Lord of Blood. Now, it is worth noting that from this point onwards, I don't actually think any of the bosses are bad, but I have to, of course, place them in my personal order of how enjoyable I find them. Unfortunately for Mog, I don't really enjoy fighting him very much. Phase 1 is quite fun though. I'd previously fought Mog the Omen deep in the subterranean shunning grounds much earlier in the game, a surprisingly difficult fight for me, but I learned so much there that I came prepared to fight this guy. He still posed quite a fun challenge, all of his attacks were very well telegraphed, his melee swings are delayed but not obnoxiously so, and the windows of punishment are quite frequent. On my first playthrough exploring the subterranean shunning grounds, I also found Mog's Shackle, an item that can be used in Phase 1 to tie him to the ground. It came in pretty useful, but was also a little frustrating to use, as if Mog was in any animation whatsoever that isn't walking or idling, it simply didn't work. During Phase 1, he will chant Tres, Duo, and Unos, as he places a red circle around your character, one for each word. And now we've reached Phase 2, which begins with Mog chanting Nihil 3 times, with your character taking a massive amount of damage and him healing a massive chunk of health 3 times. I absolutely can't stand this. There are ways to reduce the amount of damage you take, like with the wondrous Physic Purifying Crystal tier ingredient, but I really hate the idea of having to go out of my way every single playthrough just to get it if I don't want to face tank 3 highly damaging attacks and let the boss heal a huge chunk of their health. Even the weapon art Vow of the Indomitable, which grants momentary immunity, doesn't bypass a single point of this damage. This isn't the only thing I really dislike about Phase 2 either. A lot of the difficulty of this phase comes from Mog filling the arena with blood that staggers and rapidly builds blood loss if you step in it. It's not like he spews out a pool or two. No, this is a constant barrage from him, and makes half the arena unsafe to be in at almost all times. I do feel like I've been extremely negative up to this point in the video, but with all that being said, Mog Lord of Blood is far from the worst fight in the game. His music is amazing, especially in Phase 2. I love the atmosphere in Mogwyn's Palace, which you can see from down below in Nokron, by the way, where you fight the Regal Ancestor Spirit. If you are willing to go out of your way to obtain the Purifying Crystal tier, then this fight has the potential to be one of the better ones. But I've done many subsequent playthroughs of Elden Ring now, and I prefer to just face tank and accept my fate than to go and get either of those items every time I wish to fight him. At number 11 is the Fire Giant. I think I dislike this boss less than most people, but I do think it exacerbates the problems of creating very large 1 versus 1 bosses, and also shows the difficulty in creating them. In spite of its flaws, I do find the Fire Giant to be fun to fight, and oddly satisfying. The Giant has a weak spot in both of its phases. Hitting it anywhere else deals much less damage. In the first phase, this weak spot is his left foot. In the first phase, the vast majority of his attacks involve using the giant plate that it's holding or stomping at you with his feet. He has access to some other tricks like summoning a Chaos Bed Vestiges Reminiscent Sun that slowly follows you constantly until you get close to it and bait it into exploding. Since he's so large, he doesn't really have a way to get around, but his main way is by rolling. In fact, he has a scripted roll upon breaking his left foot. In case you hadn't noticed already by this point, the Fire Giant's stomach is a giant face. He reaches into his mouth and uses the power of its inner fire against you. Thankfully, Torrent is here and can be used to close the distance. Upon depleting around half his health, Phase 2 will start. Setting ablaze to his broken leg, the Cyclops on his stomach awakens, and the stomach face gets used a lot more. The fire attacks he had access to in Phase 1 double on their lethality, such as summoning 2 suns instead of 1, and the weak spot has changed to his right hand. There's not a crazy amount more to say about this boss, but I do find this fight much more enjoyable than something like Elden Beast, for example, because you have Torrent to aid you in closing the gaps and keeping the fight's rhythm going. As far as large bosses go, Fire Giant definitely isn't the best FromSoft have created, or the most enjoyable, but I don't think anyone would argue that he is anywhere near close to being the worst. Hidden in the Deathbed realm and behind Fear's simple questline, our number 10 entry Lich Dragon Fortisax waits. One thing I've always loved about this fight is how purely chaotic it feels. The fight always starts the same, with the dragon roaring into the air and causing red lightning explosions in a large circle around them. Staying close to its limbs will cause your character to glow with this exact same lightning, and after a short time, this will disconnect from your character and then quickly explode. This is to stop you from spamming his legs. You have to be paying attention to this, otherwise you'll be taking frequent instances of damage. The camera is typical FromSoft in this fight, frequently unlocking and making some of the attacks awkward to recognize, but visuals aren't the only cue to dodge his attacks. Audio is another very effective way to do so. Even when he flies away, you can follow his tail, and this is reminiscent of the ancient dragon from Dark Souls 2. There is nothing anybody can say to me that will convince me that this is not one of the most badass set pieces in the game, and incredibly satisfying to dodge. Fortisax never feels unfair, even with the camera fighting against you, but the delayed lightning surrounding your character can become annoying and interrupts the flow of the fight, but it does not come close to making the fight unenjoyable. The arena has more than enough space to compensate for his size. The music, especially in Phase 2, just adds to the chaos of the skirmish, and all this added together makes for one of the better dragon fights in the series. A lot of others say that this is what Midir wanted to be, but I personally disagree with that. With all that said, I really enjoy fighting Lich Dragon Fortisax, and he's not much of a pain to access on repeat playthroughs either. Number 9 is the Regal Ancestor Spirit. First off, the atmosphere in this fight is absolutely unmatched. The gorgeous, uncharacteristically calm and somber music with its light strings and beautiful orchestra combined with the blue, clean but also rotten environment is just incredible. You can really see the age of this place in the arena and more evidently in the boss itself. It is large, it is powerful, yet at the same time, it is rotten. Its skin barely holding it together, and its antlers have grown to the point where they branch off so much they're almost getting tangled onto themselves. The attacks are, for the most part, what you would expect. It charges at you frequently, can close the distance quickly, and even elegantly leap into the air before crashing down on top of you. It does spew mist down onto the ground, which I imagine some players would find frustrating, but the reason I don't mind it here as opposed to Rykard and Mog is because this encounter is inherently designed to be slower paced. I don't feel like any rhythm has been interrupted because of this attack, since I know the game wants me to be more patient against this foe as opposed to the others I listed, and the Regal Ancestor Spirit likes to close the distance itself anyway. There is another Ancestor Spirit in the game sharing that name, and the fights are almost identical. However, the Regal Ancestor Spirit drops a Remembrance and has access to one new mechanic that the regular one does not: the ability to absorb the souls of the deer apparitions that scatter the arena and use them to heal. I don't really find either of these fights spectacular, but what matters to me personally and from my experiences is that I enjoy them. They don't feel tedious, unfair, or even particularly challenging. They do, however, offer a bit of a change of pace to the usual encounters without feeling stale or belittled by them. These fights are just beautiful and pleasant, and I really can't find anything to complain about. I suppose I do have to deduct points from the boss due to it being essentially completely reused as I did with Astel, but at least this boss has a hell of a lot more going for it than Astel does. Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, lands herself at number 8. Phase 1 of this fight, I did not enjoy so much on my first playthrough, but after fighting her a bunch more, I have come to not only enjoy it, but absolutely adore it. The centerpiece is Renala herself, floating above you in a bubble. To break this bubble, you must shatter it by destroying smaller bubbles on the children crawlers around her. Only one of them has the bubble on them at all times though, which reveals the most irritating part of Phase 1, when it likes to play hide and seek with you, and you're wandering around trying to find them. Thankfully, the child with the bubble is always singing, making it easier to find than in similar fights before this in the series. I'm looking at you, Deacons of the Deep. Combine this singing with the beautiful music and visuals, and you get such a pretty and well-balanced encounter. You don't get spammed with projectiles constantly either, which is a nice reprieve in fights like this, and any projectiles that do get summoned get shattered simultaneously with Renala's bubbles. Unlike in Phase 1 where the magic attacks being thrown your way were easy to dodge and generous in their quantity, this phase throws that completely out of the window. Phase 2 is magic spam through and through, but done in such a way that still feels fair and doesn't require you to essentially guess what spell is being used like on the Elden Beast. She does not like you getting too close to her, and as such will jump back and cast magic a lot. Most of it is fairly easy to avoid, but getting close enough to deal any damage can be quite a struggle sometimes, not to mention the fact that she has access to attacks that completely force you to make distance, like her Remembrance spell, Renala's Full Moon. Once you get her health down a bit, she will also start summoning spirits to help her in the fight. These summons can range from a pack of basic wolves to a whole-ass dragon. Thankfully, you do not have to kill any of them, as they will disappear after a short time. All in all, I think Renala is a fairly fun fight, especially in Phase 1, despite the magic spam in Phase 2. You can make magic spamming something that doesn't feel absolutely horrendous like with the Elden Beast, and rather something that you can appropriately deal with, without having to unlock your camera and awkwardly look up just to see what magic is being cast. Landing himself comfortably at number 7 is Morgott the Omen King. It's quite rare that FromSoft rematch me against a boss, and I enjoy the rematch even more, and in this case, I find Morgott much more fun than his counterpart Margit. Margit the Fell Omen is not in this video as he does not drop a remembrance, but it turns out that he was just a vision cast by his real self, Morgott. I think it's pretty unfair to call this fight a reskin, because the moveset here is almost entirely different. I really love how Morgott moves. He's fast, but not too fast, deliberately delaying some of his swings at you before making his way across the arena again. Despite his speed, at no point does it ever feel overwhelming or unfair. In fact, to me, it just feels like I'm fighting an awesome, agile boss. You do need to pick and choose your windows extremely carefully, much more than the other bosses with Morgoth. At first, it's difficult to determine if he's going to follow up on some attacks, and so you hesitate to actually go in for any hits. I know I certainly did. It's not that he doesn't have any attack opportunities, quite the contrary in fact. This attack in particular, where he plunges the ground with both of his weapons, leaves him open for damage for quite an extended period. Depleting his health to around half initiates phase 2 of the fight, where in his desperation to regain his glory, he goes insane and starts essentially melting himself alive. His moveset changes quite dramatically between phases, messing with your muscle memory and causing some potential panic moments frequently. The majority of combos become much longer and more punishing, difficult to avoid, but this comes with the trade-off of needing much more time to recover from them. I think Morgoth the Omen King is an excellent boss and well deserving of a spot here on this list. Although Morgoth is only number 7, I still think he is excellent. The bosses before him are just even more excellent. At number 6, we have the Beast Clergyman and Malekith the Black Blade. I know just 10 seconds ago I was saying that I think every boss after Morgoth is even more excellent than him, but I do have to temporarily get a bit negative again. Before the fight with Malekith, we are introduced to him as the Beast Clergyman in phase 1. This fight isn't great for melee players either, with extremely fast melee swings if you're close to him, to AoE and projectile spam at a distance. It feels extremely difficult to find opportunities to attack him. Difficulty does not make a boss bad. In fact, my favorite From Software boss ever is regarded as one of their most difficult. But when a boss feels like it is intentionally designed to ban you from hitting it, it can feel quite frustrating and sometimes unfair. I didn't really feel like the Beast Clergyman was unfair. He does have a few attacks that allow you to strafe and punish, but for the most part, this fight felt like it was just baiting the same attack, getting a few hits in, then running away to deal with more projectiles. It's not terrible, I just never found the gameplay loop to be particularly thrilling. But now phase 1 is out of the way, let's get to the reason why the boss is at number 6, the skirmish with Malekith the Black Blade. Never before have I found a boss to go through such a dramatic amelioration between two phases. Malekith is extremely fun to fight and is probably the most satisfying boss in the game to dodge flawlessly. He uses the environment to his advantage, clinging and diving off the pillars, jumping in the air to throw projectiles at you before crashing down with a double spin. If you're lucky enough to meet him on the ground, a lot of his melee swings can be strafed and open up a nice window for damage, but watch out for the follow-ups. Malekith is very fast and agile, and this quite often comes with the caveat of having attacks that occasionally go off camera and becoming difficult, sometimes even frustrating to dodge, but I never really have that with Malekith. Dodging the full flurry of projectiles, then watching him miss the double spin upon reaching the ground is incredibly satisfying and also rewarding. I really believe that Malekith deserves his spot at number 6. Even Beast Clergyman isn't that bad if you get to learn the strafes. He can be a little boring and a bit of a slog to get through, but Malekith more than makes up for it. I love this boss, and I'm very satisfied with his placement. Number 5 is Star Scourge Radahn. You can have two very different experiences with this fight. You can summon many NPCs, including the best in the game, pod friend Iron Fist Alexander, to overwhelm Radahn to death and have the NPCs distract and draw aggro. Alternatively, you can face him one-on-one, and this is my personal preferred way to fight him. His attacks generally are quite intimidating, but they do have pretty generous hitboxes, especially after patch 1.03 rolled along. His attacks almost exclusively involve swimming his swords in big arcs around him, but he also has much longer combos like this flurry where he roars and hits the ground 7 times in front of him before finishing with a swipe. This attack is a fantastic opportunity to deal damage to him. Once this phase is done, he will buff his swords and introduce many more attacks to his selection, including this giant slam, which again is a great opportunity to deal damage. Torrent is extremely helpful in keeping distance to punish his more opportune attacks. But you finally get the hang of dodging all the swings when suddenly he leaps into the air and everything goes quiet. The arena goes dark as Radahn blots the skies with clouds and he unleashes his deadly phase 2. He will generally start this phase by conjuring 4 large meteors, which will stay there until he does one specific attack. I really like this, as it fooled me in my first playthrough. I was constantly preparing for him to fire them at me, hesitating to head in to deal damage to him. They were terrifying. Occasionally, he will fly into the air and spin to catch you off guard. This attack looks absolutely incredible, and just like Malekith, is extremely satisfying to dodge. There's a lot of variation to Radahn, and a lot of players will experience the fight very differently, and that is part of why I enjoy defeating him. Defeating him also changes the lands between in a significant way, and so it marks a large checkpoint in your journey through Elden Ring. Number 4 is Dragonlord Placidusax, an optional boss that you can encounter that is placed at the Crumbling Farum Azula before Malekith. This fight is probably my favorite dragon fight in FromSoft's Spiritual Souls series. The fight starts with it roaring and summoning red lightning bolts. Unlike Fortisax, you have plenty of time to react to these and can actually roll them with somewhat generous timing, giving you time to react and deal damage between the bolts. Staying at its tail makes its moveset much more predictable and allows plenty of time to see what it is doing, so you can punish appropriately. Red lightning comes from its claws in a quick swipe that you can then strafe to get yet another massive window to deal damage. When its HP is depleted to about 2/3, it will hover into the air and disappear, before again crashing down on you with its giant red claw. This 2-headed dragon, that looks like it couldn't move any faster than a snail, is flying through the air and moving faster than most bosses in the game, with attacks that are perfectly telegraphed and are followed up consistently with the same moves. I imagine most people find its teleporting to be frustrating, but if you stay locked onto it, camera will follow it and allow you to prepare for what attack is coming. With any weapon, you have enough time to get one sneaky hit in at least per attack, before repeating the cycle. Before it dies, it will finish a flying attack with a Dark Eater Midir-esque laser barrage, which is the only attack it has that I dislike. The laser is very challenging to avoid and does an immense amount of damage both with the laser itself and the area of effect explosion that follows it. There is plenty of time between it disappearing into the air and crashing back down again, meaning you can recover your health or FP, or even rebuff your weapon if needed. The music emphasizes the incredible set piece of this fight, and I love it all the more for that. Perfectly dodging a giant double-headed dragon unleashing a myriad of hard-hitting red lightning attacks just feels incredible. Dragonlord Placidusax is an amazing, fair, and challenging set piece, and well deserving of its spot here in the top 4 Remembrance bosses in Elden Ring. Landing himself the top 3 spot is Hoarah Warrior, but before we get to him, we have to battle the first Elden Lord Godfrey, which is a skirmish even more enjoyable than Hoarah that follows. Godfrey slides around the arena and slams his feet to create a small shockwave in front of him, but never makes enough distance that it feels irritating or obnoxious. Many of his axe swings open up a small but frequently occurring window to deal some damage, and this persists into his second hidden phase. Normally, I'm not a fan of huge ground earthquake attacks, but Elden Ring's introduction of jumping, and with that being a very much viable method of avoiding damage, it mitigates some annoying factors about these attacks that Godfrey has access to. There's one attack in particular, one that he uses as a finisher to many of his combos, that is very easy and generous to strafe that I can't help but do it every time, and it opens up quite a lengthy window to get some damage done. Welcome, if you will, the true second phase of this battle. You face Hoarah, a form of Godfrey which sees his axe disappear, and him fighting you with his bare hands. Of all the bosses in the game, he has the most grab attacks, which have him throw you far into the air before slamming you back down again. He has like 4 different variations of this, all with different deceiving timings for dodging them, but if you can do exactly that, then almost all of them open up a window to deal damage. He will frequently lock himself into very long flurries of punches that can be strafed yet again for another window of damage. This may sound like the fight is easy, but this is in fact quite the contrary. Hoarah will batter and bruise you again and again on first playthroughs, and on subsequent ones as well. To make sure you avoid the most damage possible, you must utilize jumping. Rolling works, but it's far less effective with its timings against many of Hoarah's attacks. Combining that aspect and making strafing a very good method of avoiding damage to deal some of your own, it makes Hoaraloo an exhilarating fight. Godfrey, first Elden Lord, is also an extremely fun fight and makes dying to Hoaraloo a bit less sour since you get to fight Godfrey again. Hoaraloo, Warrior, is much more deserving of a final boss than Elden Beast ever will be. It's such a shame that this fight is such a delicious appetizer to such a terrible main course. Oh boy, it's that fight. The infamous Malenia, Blade of Miquella, lands herself comfortably at number 2. On my first playthrough, she took me just over 7 hours to take down, and I enjoyed every single second of it. It is an incredibly demanding skirmish when you face her 1 versus 1, but at no point did I ever feel like I died to something that was unfair. Now I know what you're thinking. Let me address the elephant in the room immediately. Her waterfowl dance attack. It did take me a very long time to figure out how to deal with this attack, but you only need one of 2 things. Either a 100% physically resistant shield, or distance. The attack is on a timer, and she won't perform it until you've depleted around 20% of her health. Now you have 2 options. Either prepare for it by keeping your distance and dodging appropriately, or react retroactively by whipping out the shield and blocking the first flurry. In fact, you don't need either of these, as it's possible to dodge even without a shield or appropriate distance, although the method of doing so is far out of the reach of the absolute vast majority of players. While I do agree this attack could do with a bit of tweaking, I do not think it makes the fight unbalanced or warrants a nerf, like a lot of players seem to think is necessary. So let's look on the other end of the spectrum. There are a lot of people that think Malenia has been made too difficult. I do think she is potentially the most difficult boss FromSoft have ever created, but this doesn't come from being unfair. Malenia staggers very, very easily from pretty much anything. Although she may heal on every hit she lands, these staggers will allow opportunities for you to attack many times in a row and outdamage that healing immensely. Take this footage as an example. Every time she staggers, I know I am 100% safe to go for another attack. If she doesn't stagger, I prepare for retaliation on her end. In addition to staggering to pretty much anything, she also just has attacks that are very easy to dodge and punish. Waterfowl Dance might be a highly damaging and very demanding attack, but when you look at Malenia in the bigger picture, you start to realize that this apparent unfairness isn't really present at all. To mine and everyone else's surprise, Malenia has a second phase that is shockingly, arguably, even more difficult than her first. Many things remain consistent though. She staggers very easily and shares a lot of her moves from the Blade of Miquella phase. And there are also some parts of this phase that are easier and some that are harder. But this video isn't about difficulty, this is about boss enjoyment, and I enjoy both of her phases. The predictability of some of her attacks and how easily some of them are to punish in her second phase put it on par with her first. Dodging the slice and dice attack in both phases is satisfying and can be followed up by an easily punishable one. She is not immune to status effects or riposts in both phases, allowing for some rewarding big damage. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and the Goddess of Rot is a difficult fight, but at no point have I ever found her to be unfair. She is easily punished in both phases and allows big windows for damage that far outweighs any healing she can do, even if you have to block the Waterfowl Dance. And the euphoria for defeating her? Absolutely unbelievable. But of course, there has to be a number 1. And for me, it can only go to Godric the Grafted. In all my times entering that fog gate, I am excited and happy to fight this boss. Phase 1 mainly involves slamming the ground with his axe. Most of these are quite slow and can be easily avoided. But suddenly, he raises them into the air, spins a tornado around him, and he's rolling and diving all over the arena before slamming back down to the ground. Godric does need a lot of time to recover from this, so it is a nice window to attack him. Much like Hoaraloo, Godric will frequently lock himself into fairly long combos that can act as more opportunities to attack him, but will punish the greedy by spitting himself into a tornado right afterwards. He gives you a false sense of security by acting really slow and lumbering, but will break this sense suddenly when he's flying and rolling to the sides. These rolls can be followed by an extremely quick arm swipe or an attack where he leans on his arm and reaches far with his axe, and this has deceptive range. Unleashing the power of the grafted dragon, Godric begins spewing fire everywhere in Phase 2, laughing gleefully as he does it. He has an attack for every distance you can be at. If you stay far away from him, he will throw molten rocks at you. If you're in his face, he will aim at the ground and wreak havoc in the area in front of him. If you're medium range, he will fire a flamethrower in an arc in front of him, which can be rolled through, or even better, can have its distance closed immediately, so you can attack him as he's doing it. Godric the Grafted has remained my favorite boss in the game ever since my first playthrough. He may not be a particularly difficult boss when compared to the others, but he is designed, dare I say, perfectly. No unfair attacks, very satisfying to dodge, many ways to avoid his attacks, absolutely breathtaking music, incredible appearance, badass voice lines, everything. There is nothing I have to complain about with this fight, and I think he is more than deserving of his spot as being the best Remembrance boss in Elden Ring. Thanks for watching.
I am the Lord of all that is golden, and one day we'll return together to our home, bathed in rays of gold